Welcome to the Death Happens podcast, an insider's guide to dying. We're your insiders. I'm hospice nurse Penny.
And I'm Hallie, hospice social worker. Today we have a hospice spiritual counselor with us, Steve. He's fantastic, and I'm excited for you to meet him because I already know him.
I
But
am
first,
excited too.
Penny, I know you have a hot topic, even though it's going to be a couple of months before people hear this. It's hot topic as of right now.
Yes, hot topic. O.J. Simpson has died of cancer just a couple of days ago. He died from what I've heard is prostate cancer, although the media hasn't had a whole lot of information. I did see a video of OJ. I'm not sure when it was taken, but he was asked if he was on hospice and he flat out denied that he was on hospice. He said, "I'm fine. I'm not on hospice. I don't know where you heard that." So he did deny that he was on hospice and that he was dying.
That's interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
I mean, so many different things to talk about with him. Of course, the obvious, but I really love your videos and your takes on them, which is, first of all, it doesn't really matter what we think of the person if they're on hospice. If they're on hospice.
Right. If they are,
Uh,
who knows if he was?
yeah, then we would treat them the same, just like all of our patients. You know?
Right, right. He does what I say is he doesn't deserve it, but he gets it. Like he will get that treatment even though he doesn't deserve it because
Yeah.
that's what we do. We don't judge our patients and we are just taking care of them no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. But yeah, I did do a video about that. And I also covered prostate cancer. I like
Mm-hmm.
to, whenever somebody famous dies of cancer, I like to talk about, what type of cancer it was, what are the risk factors, what kind of testing can you do preventatively to find out if you have it so you can treat early, and also what kind of symptoms might OJ Simpson have experienced. And that most likely would have been bony pain
Mm-hmm.
because prostate cancer does metastasize to the lymph and to the bones, although you aren't going to have any symptoms really from lymph node metastasis.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, when your cancer gets into your lymph system, I call that the highway to the body. Like when something gets into your lymph system, it goes everywhere in your body.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of symptoms related to that. But for sure, bony cancer, any cancer in the bone is going to be quite painful. So he probably did experience that. And the other thing I talked about is that, anybody with any terminal illness can experience terminal agitation caused by existential suffering. And if anybody's a candidate for existential suffering, that could definitely be somebody who brutally murdered his ex-wife, mother of his children, and perfect stranger, Ron Goldman, as well. I
So
would
he
think
was
that
acquitted.
he was acquitted in a criminal court,
Right.
criminal trial,
Found guilty
but
in the civil. That's right.
found guilty in a civil trial, and wrote a
Mm-hmm.
book called If
If
I
I
Did
did
It,
it.
and basically confessed in the book. I mean, the details that he gave were definitely indicative of the type of crime that happened.
Yeah.
So, and then I don't know if a lot of people don't know this, at least according to the comments that I had, because people were saying he shouldn't have been able to profit on their deaths. And he wasn't. The Goldmans sued for the rights to that book, and
Yeah.
they actually won. And they didn't rename it. It was still called If I Did It, but on the book cover, the title, the if, is tiny, tiny, tiny little font. And
Oh,
then I Did It is in big letters. So it says If I Did
interesting.
It, but it's like if I did it, So and they were the ones who profited from that. But I was I don't know about you, Hallie. Let's see. You're how much younger than me?
47. I'm 47.
47. Okay,
I
so
was
you're
in my senior year when the Bronco chase happened.
yeah, so I was a stay-at-home mom with a little baby, and I watched every second of that trial, and I loved O.J. Simpson. I was a big fan because, I remember when I was a kid and I wanted to start watching football because McDonald's had some kind of football game and I knew nothing about football. So my dad was like, "Well, I'll teach you." And so we would watch football together. And I remember OJ, you know, I remember watching him play football. I remember seeing him act in movies. I thought he was handsome. I really, really liked him. So going into watching that trial, I didn't have, you know, an opinion that
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that he maybe did it, you know. Like I watched it open-mindedly, like as if I was a juror.
Yeah.
Although watching the Bronco chase was kind of like, why is he running if he didn't do it? But anyway, all that to say, I watched every second of that trial, unbiased, and at the end was like, of course he fucking did it. You know, like the motive was there. I mean, unfortunately the defense team just wasn't very good, unfortunately. And having him try on the glove, the actual glove, was a huge, huge mistake. Because anybody
Mm-hmm.
that wears gloves on a regular basis like that knows that they do tend to shrink up. You know, like when they get wet, they shrink up. And of course, it's not going to fit. They should have had a different glove, brand new glove, same style, same brand, same size. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah.
Well, and the
Yeah.
social
So,
worker part of me, of course, wants to, acknowledge the terrible history of, as far as bringing it back to hospice, of why someone might not be on hospice if they are Black. And
yes. Yeah.
historically, terrible things have happened in the healthcare system. So that part of it, as far as hospice, that makes sense.
That is a really great point to make, is that we do know that the Black population is underserved in all areas of medicine, but also in hospice as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, too, that's important to acknowledge is that his family, you know, they would be part of the hospice team. They would be
Yeah.
part of our hospice care. And they've also really suffered a lot, too. The kids have suffered. They lost their mother. I'm sure, whether they believe their dad did it or not, have heard that their dad did it, and that had to be
Mm-hmm.
hard to grow up with. And, you know, so we would also be caring for their family, like for his family, as
Yeah.
our part of our hospice care would be grief support for them, and probably providing a lot of counseling for them as well.
Well, and that's the perfect tie-in for our guest today. So let's get to it.
Let's do it.
Steve, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's so good to see you again.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
I know, it's been too long. So,
Been a long
Steve, we
time.
know that you're hospice spiritual care. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. So my name is Steven in full. I prefer Steve. A lot of my friends call me Steve. Last name is Bundy. Yes, and I have been a hospice chaplain since around about the time of the pandemic. I've worked with a couple of hospices pretty much in Washington State, Eastern Washington, and then in the Northwest as well, and now in Tacoma. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I'm willing to talk more about it, but I started off as a pastor, and life unfolded in interesting ways that led me to this place, and I think I fit in pretty well. I find it very meaningful, and yeah, it's been wonderful. I get to meet wonderful people like Holly, work together at some point, and I get to meet Penny here online. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and speaking of that, I know we've talked about your incredible start to hospice. I mean, talking about starting in the pandemic. Do I remember correctly, were you in a hospital first?
Yes. So I can go back as far as maybe my MDiv and then give the background to that, if that is okay.
Yeah, if you want to let people know how to even become a hospice chaplain, that's helpful for people too.
Okay. So I started off as a pastor, served in Kenya, and then for 3.5 years, and then came to the States for my master's, the MDiv program, which normally takes 3.5 years. So I was basically preparing for full-time pastoral ministry.
And for
In
people that
the
don't know, an MDiv is a Master's of Divinity, yeah?
Yes, it's a Master's of Divinity. It's it's one of those master's programs that takes a long time. It's 3.5 years. I had friends who came after me and did one master's and finished, and did a second one and still left me there.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
So your pastors study a lot.
Yes.
uh, yeah. So it was very interesting because I was at my faith tradition is a Seventh-day Adventist faith tradition, and I was at the flagship seminary of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And so what happens is when the graduating class is about to graduate, they have the equivalent of the HR departments, like in all the what we call conferences, like the different departments of the church that run regional areas. They come over to Andrews University, where I was, and we have what we call ministry opportunity days, which is a wonderful time where you can get to interview with ministerial directors. Those are like the HR people that do the hiring. And we were looking forward to that because it was our turn, and open play field, like present yourself out there, find one of the best places you can go and serve. And then boom, the pandemic hits early 2020, and we are the graduating class, and Ministry Opportunity Day gets canceled, and all the churches worldwide get closed.
Yeah.
Oh.
So imagine spending 3.5 years studying for your master's, waiting for your biggest opportunity, and then like the world just shuts your complete opportunity, like we were lost, like what do we do? So in the midst of trying to find out, okay, what else can we be able to do with our skill set? That's when I found out about chaplaincy work. And then I found out what you need to train, what you need to do to actually, start working as a chaplain. And you have to do what they call clinical pastoral education. So beyond your Masters of Divinity, there's hospitals across the states that have what they call a CPE program.
Mm-hmm.
You can sign up for a residency. Mostly it's done in hospitals, and you can do mostly it's about 3 units of clinical pastoral education in a residency, and then you'll be ready for chaplaincy work, professional chaplaincy work. The catch with that is that you needed at least 1 unit before you go in for residency. Now, some people who are on the chaplaincy track in when they're doing their Masters of Divinity, usually they try to get that 1 unit because they know they're prepping for that. But for the rest of us who are not prepping for that, that's really not needed, in most pastoral settings. So here I was, and there's residency opportunities, which are actually nice because most of them actually pay you to go and study, you get a stipend, but you need that 1 unit. But fortunately, with the problems of the pandemic, they were also dealing with a lot of cancellations. People are not coming in. So there were some openings, and they were willing to be a bit more flexible with their intake criteria. And I was able to land a residency even without 1 unit of CPE in South Carolina. So I headed out from Michigan to South Carolina and got into a hospital in Greenwood, South Carolina, Self Regional Hospital. Nice hospital down there. And Greenwood is a nice place, by the way. Great weather, great lakes. Holly knows I love lakes. So yeah, I started my clinical pastoral education. It's like a peer program where you meet fellow ministers who are getting together to study, and then you go in after. There's like lectures, and then there's the practical part where you go in and do visits in the hospital. So you get allocated like a floor that you cover, and then you come back and give your experiences and you reflect on that. And so there's it's a balance of that for like about a year. So what happened is I was given 2 floors that were all full COVID.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
wow.
So
Trial by
one of
fire.
those, yeah, one of those floors was actually a surgical floor, but I mean, quickly just filled up with COVID patients. So I was manning 2 floors of COVID patients, and immediately I saw what it was like for people to be at the end of life and they did not have family members. Because, like, at that time, you need family, but family can't even have access to you.
Right. Yeah.
You've got limited numbers of healthcare professionals who are even willing to come. There was like very few nurses that were actually even willing to be there. There was one who was just overworking, you know. There was one time my whole team, you know, the whole department literally actually got COVID.
Oh,
The
Oh,
whole
wow.
like chaplaincy department, one by one, each of us just got COVID. The funny thing is, I'm the only one who didn't get COVID, and I was the only one who was directly with COVID.
oh my
When
gosh.
COVID closed. I think it's just the grace of God. Honestly, I don't know. There's enough times I felt like I was completely sick, went to test, and I didn't have it. But I think from my own point of view, I think God just needed somebody to be there for those people because they didn't
Mhm.
have anyone. And it's the first time I really saw what it's like for someone to die, you know, with just machines on them, as
Yeah.
compared to when they actually die and they have somebody that they can hold their hand, you know, and it's very comforting at that point, you know. So I got a real sense of what it means to be there for someone at the end of life when
Mhm.
they don't even have, you know, like their family. So that was the beginning of me um, working with end of life patients in a very difficult kind of situation. Now, before that, I was applying everywhere. You see, now I'm graduating with my master's. Churches are closed, so I'm applying like everywhere for jobs, you know, whatever chaplaincy jobs are available. So I had made an application to a hospice in Washington, which I had not. Um, I didn't succeed, but I came pretty close. So yeah, I had applied to a hospice in Washington in the process of trying to find where else to go other than pastoral ministry, as I'm also looking for a CPE residency. And
Mm.
so the CPE residency opened first, and then while I was, you know, deep in my CPE residency, this hospice in Washington said they had another opening and they would love for me to join their team if I'm willing. And so that's how I came to Washington, um, and started hospice work. And it was still during the pandemic. So yeah, that's how I got into hospice work.
So did you do a lot of virtual visits then? Because like my ministry or agency that I work for, our chaplains and social workers were having to do only virtual like Zoom meetings. They weren't allowed to go into people's homes during the pandemic in the beginning of the pandemic. So they had to just do all of their pastoral care was, you know, over a Zoom meeting for quite some time. Did you do that as well, or were you able to go into people's homes?
So right at the pandemic, I was at the hospital. So
Mhm.
at the hospital, I did a combination of both. Uh, Mostly, I would actually just go into the patient's rooms
Mhm.
because literally we were like the only people that would have access to. But I had to wear full PPEs, like the complete set, and
Right.
get the
Mask and
whole,
everything.
yeah, mask and
Yeah.
everything. So I was able to do those visits, but now I couldn't do them as frequently as we used to. So I would make phone calls as well from the office because, you know, in a hospital setting, from the chaplaincy office, I could call sometimes some of those patients and actually just talk to them on the phone. Because I mean, you can't do a Zoom meeting with a patient in a hospital. They don't even have their computer at that
Right.
point, but they do have a phone by their bedside that they can just answer. So I used to talk with them on the phone and then schedule certain visits, you know, every so often, maybe a couple of days, every 2 3 days or something like that. Because there were many. I couldn't do like all of them at the same time, but I would keep in touch with them. And now later, because the pandemic was still ongoing by the time I started uh, chaplaincy work at a hospice, I don't think I did any Zoom visit. The only Zoom programs we had were bereavement programs that
Oh.
we just had like bereavement classes on Zoom with the
Mhm.
families that had been bereaved because hospice caters also for the bereaved
Right.
for quite some time. So those we did on Zoom. But for the patients, either um, I would still visit in person, um, if it was absolutely necessary, you know. And but I would have to wear like the
Full
PPEs, like, yeah,
PPE.
full PPEs. There's even one time I had to do a funeral for a patient that died of COVID, and their pastor, their pastors were not willing to show up for
Mm.
the funeral, and I had cared for them until the end. So I was coming in, wearing PPEs, and this family was lost. You can imagine that, calling for your pastor, and everybody's skeptical about coming to do a funeral at that time. So that's one funeral I did of a COVID patient that died of COVID. Tough time.
I wonder if we should also say, for anybody listening that doesn't know what PPE is, that it's personal protective equipment, and it
Yeah.
means glove, mask, gown, eye protection,
Shield.
Booties.
booty.
Shoe
You
booties.
didn't have to wear booties for COVID, though, right?
No.
For
We put
COVID, it was
every-
like an N95 or a capper or a papper.
We did everything. When we started, we
Really?
were doing the booties too.
Booties too.
Yep.
Wow.
They
didn't want you to
actually
get
ordered
COVID
us.
heat.
No, they actually even ordered us Crocs that were the full shoe Crocs,
Uh-huh.
so we could wipe them down.
Oh, wow. Huh. So, Hallie, were you going in to see hospice patients during COVID?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. My agency was like only nurses and aides were going in.
yeah.
We
both
even
of our
set our
counselors.
patients. We even set our patients up with iPads so that they could do.
Yeah.
Zoom
Both
meetings.
of our counselors were going in spiritual care and social work. The only issue we
Wow.
had was off and on facilities would change
Oh,
their
yeah.
policy. So
Yeah.
between one day and another, no, only the nurse can come. No, not even the nurse can come. I mean, it was a lot of partnering with facilities and state regulations and them feeling trapped in the middle, and
Right.
it was tough.
Yeah, facilities were horrible.
Well, Steve, I think that's a great transition to, you talked about being a pastor first and then went into this hospice chaplaincy. And we know, Penny and I know, that chaplains in hospice or spiritual counselors in hospice, their personal religions are not affecting what they're doing with the patient. So if you could transition us to the listeners understanding, what does a chaplain or a spiritual counselor do in hospice?
Okay, so a chaplain or a spiritual counselor offers emotional and spiritual support. We'll define that a little further, to patients and families, because the unit of care in hospice is not just the patient. That's the difference between hospice and hospital. In hospice, the unit of care is the patient and their circle of support, which is a family and other sometimes friends and other people around them. So yeah, I, as a chaplain, I come on board, and if the family is willing, to take advantage of the service that we offer after I've explained it to them, then majorly I'd be offering emotional support and spiritual support. Now, spiritual support can take different forms, because spirituality, the way we define it, is basically how people find meaning in life, the things they find most meaningful in life. And people find meaning in life in different ways. Some would find it through their careers. Others, family, that's the most meaningful to them. Others, they have a sense of a higher being. Could be God, could be just an awe of the universe and the way it is. So we try to walk that journey with our patients and their families, to respectfully just be by their sides and understand that, hey, help them, like, get the understanding that we are here not to try and change you in any ways, but to just support you, to affirm you in your own journey, and just let you know you're not by yourself, and like I said, I literally saw what it's like for someone to die, by themselves. You would be surprised. Someone would just appreciate having a hand to hold, and really that's what we do. Yeah.
I love that explanation. So many people, and myself included, before I became a hospice nurse and being raised with no religion, and I call myself agnostic, bordering on Buddhist. you know, when I was in the hospital and a chaplain came to speak to me before I went for surgery and asked me if I needed anything. And he was it was in a military hospital. So he's wearing a military uniform, but he was Catholic. So he had the little whatever collar on, you know, with his uniform. And it scared the hell out of me because he thought I was going to die. And I also didn't want to be preached to. And so many people, they decline the chaplain. It happens all the time because they are worried that somebody's going to try to preach to them or save their soul, or, you know. And ever since I became a hospice nurse and I learned that is not the role of the chaplain, then I'm always telling people, do not decline the chaplain, you know, at least meet them. Don't just decline them. And when we're forever trying to teach our nurses, our admit nurses, not to represent the other disciplines, just let them know that the other team members will be calling so that they can explain their own role rather than us trying to represent, because so many people will say, I don't want a chaplain. I don't need a chaplain, you know, and it is such a valuable role that you play. And I love the way you explained that just now. That was a really great way to put that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why our agency has really moved towards the term spiritual care rather than chaplain, just for that exact fear, is that they don't understand what that role is within hospice.
Yeah.
We've tried to do that, and there are some of our chaplains have pushed back, and my agency is huge, and we go multi-regional across several states. And so there are lots of players in the game, and some of them are like, nope, I went to school to become a chaplain and I'm not willing to give that title up. And then we have others who are like, no, spiritual counselor is fine. So we've tried to do the same thing. We've tried to lean towards let's stop calling them chaplain, because there is this, you know, misunderstanding about the chaplain role, and the spiritual counselor, I think, is a little more neutral sounding, but we haven't got there yet. I'm happy to hear that other hospice agencies are progressive more than mine is.
Yeah, and really, you know, clinical pastoral education is what really helps us to learn, you know, how to, yes, appreciate our own personal beliefs, hold them, but also make space for, you know, to accommodate other people who, you know, have differing views, and still train on how to just be there, you know, and walk that journey, you know,
Yeah.
with people who might be very different, even holding perhaps beliefs that can be very triggering, you know.
Yeah. We were just talking
Yes.
about that right before you came on, was
Oh, yeah.
it
Mhm.
doesn't matter what the person's political beliefs are, religious
Yes.
beliefs are. There are patient first, and that's how we're going to support them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And CPE training, clinical, back to the question you'd asked, Harley, how does a chaplain train? That's a big part of chaplaincy training during clinical pastoral education. You know, the whole element of self-awareness, you know, just being aware of yourself, what your limits are, what your strengths are, what your triggers are, you know, what your traumas have been, you know, and the kind of thing you carry with you into that environment of care, and what that is likely to do to you,
Yeah.
and, you know, to the person you're caring for, how that is likely to impact your care. Just being aware of that, and then refining your skill of care, you know, during the CPE times, and also as you gain experience during your service as a spiritual counselor or a chaplain, depending on the time. And for me, I prefer the term spiritual counselor because of what you say, depending on Hali, you said, because it's a neutral term. And in my own experience, I've had cases where, you know, knowing the skepticism that people have, you know, sometimes towards the end of the life, you know, and when someone is struggling with the end of life, you know, the last thing you probably want is, you know, a pastor coming with a cross and praying over you, like, man, this is it, if you're not ready for it. But sometimes it's not about that. So just assuaging those fears would be a big deal. And I've seen just the term spiritual counselor can open doors. I remember at one time, when a patient came into hospice, and of course they've done the admit, and sometimes you get a little info on who this patient is and their family. And I didn't think this family would accept, you know, a chaplain. At the time, my title was spiritual counselor, but I made the call as I'm supposed to and explained what I do. And to my surprise, they said, you know what? Yeah, we appreciate the nurse and the social work and everything, but I think at this time what we really need is a counselor, because it's even really hard to find a counselor out here during the pandemic. Like they were overwhelmed. So just the title spiritual counselor just opened doors, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time with this family until the father died. Yeah.
Oh.
I love that. I want to make sure I leave space for Penny. I have always ton of questions, but if
Well,
you have some.
I always
Can I
I
share
don't
another experience as you're leaving space for?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's what I was like trying to formulate the words to say is tell us more stories. Like what is your like your favorite experience that you've had, or your most enlightening, or whatever. Go ahead. You got lots of stories, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of stories, but just another story that aligns with what we've just talked about uh your title as a spiritual counselor just opening doors, and just also the training that you have, that you don't have to give up your own beliefs. You can hold your own beliefs, you can have them, but they can still be a blessing to you, and you can still be a blessing to other people out here. So I went into this patient's home and, of course, explained my role as a chaplain. I was more interested in knowing about me, and there's an element of self-disclosure that sometimes I allow, or many times I've got to allow, and it helps us make a connection. And so he knew me for what my faith is, and because he asked about it, and as much as I would try to be as professional as I can, he was very interested about it, and he was clearly, for him, he was an atheist and a non-believer, in anything Christian and stuff like that. And so when he understood my role, I mean, he always welcomed me to come in and hold conversations, but he clearly knew what my belief is. And he never bothered me about it. I never bothered to ask if I should pray for him or anything like that. So one time, I've just completed a visit with him, and he just says, "Hey, you know what, Steve? I need you to come next Friday and come and pray for me." I'm like, why would you want me to come and pray for you? This is not things, like you believe in or anything. I don't want to offend you or anything like. It's like, no. You've been very respectful. You have allowed me to be in my space, to be who I am, to hold my beliefs, and I know who you are. I want to give you the chance to come and do your own thing here with me, and just come next Friday.
You're
Just want you
making
to
me
come and pray.
cry, Steve. I love you so much.
And like, I was like, "Are you serious?" And like, yeah, I need you to next Friday come. And we set a time, and I was like, "Okay, I'll come." And I thought, like, he wasn't very serious about it. I'll just come. Probably he will have forgotten about it. It'll be any other visit. And when I showed up that Friday, it's like, I'm ready. I'm ready for prayer, man. And I prayed for him, and after that, we had a wonderful conversation left. The next time I came, he was watching this documentary on space, space in the galaxies, and I love that stuff as well, so we could connect very well. And I was like, Steve, this thing about God, I don't know about God, whether he's real or not, but I guess I'm about to find out if he is. And I was just kind of asking, so how do you feel about that? It's like, you know what? I can't prove whether he exists or not, but if he does, I think I'm ready to have a conversation if he does. And I was like, wait a minute, this guy, and he died soon after that. I think a week after that or so, he died. And he was very peaceful. And it shocked me because this is somebody whose belief is very different from what I have. And the way I am seeing him being peaceful at the end of life is not even the way I have seen people who believe there's a God who exists
Yeah.
being like, I've seen people traumatized, disturbed at the end of life. but still believing there's a God and I'm about to meet them and still not feeling like they are ready. But here's someone who's saying, no, I don't believe in this God business thing, but I think I've made peace with everything in my life and even the fact that he might be existing. And if he does, I'm ready to have a conversation with him. And who am I to try and disturb that space where he's in a good spot?
Yeah.
So that was another wonderful story I had.
Callie and I are shaking our heads like a couple of bobbleheads because same experience. And and I'm on social media and I get lots of comments on my videos. And I do have people saying that, oh, atheists must have a terrible time when they're dying because they don't have any belief. And I always say, you know what? I've actually seen more people who were convicted in their religion have a struggle at the end of life and worry about it than people who were agnostic or atheists. It doesn't necessarily bring you peace at the end of your life to be really religious, So yeah, that definitely struck a chord there, but I love that story. That's beautiful.
Steve's got great stories.
Yeah.
You all have great stories, I'm sure.
Do you have you seen many patients who are having deathbed visions?
Deathbed visions? Maybe not. I'm not sure I've had a lot of visits to deathbed visions. And I think the reason probably is as chaplains, we are not usually there at the very, very end. Like
Yeah. Well,
I
people
think
can vision before the end, though. I've had patients who were weeks before their death who would tell me that they were seeing, whoever their deceased
okay.
person.
I
know they're called deathbed visions, but it's a misnomer because really it can happen weeks before a person's death. But basically, the end of life visions where people are visioning their,
like their
deceased
loved
loved
ones,
ones.
having dreams
Yes.
about their loved ones, who passed away a long time ago. Yes, I have had a lot of those conversations with patients, especially as they approach the end of life, and especially dear family members that have long been deceased. People would begin having dreams, or visions of them being around them or maybe interacting with them, and it appears to be something that commonly happens uh, around end of life. I've not had the most experience in hospice, but I do try to listen to other hospice professionals, and I kind of pick up from what they say that it's a pretty common
Pretty
occurrence.
common. Yeah.
And it's one of the things we try to normalize with our patients, because they can be a bit disturbing, for some people. But we try to normalize and let them know, hey, we do see this. It's part of. It appears to be part of the normal process. At the end of life.
And I think it's probably more disturbing for the circle of support, right? Not usually the patient. The patient's usually like, yeah, they're right there. It's fine.
Yeah. The I although I've had patients who were reticent to talk about it, like one lady didn't. I would ask people if they were having visions because it helped me to know kind of where they were in their trajectory, and she first said no, and then I told her it was normal that people would see their deceased loved ones at the end of life, and she goes, oh, okay. And then she said, my dad's standing in the kitchen over there, and of course he wasn't. And she said, I didn't want to tell you because I thought you'd think I was crazy. So I think sometimes they just don't tell us about it. But definitely families can be like, I think they need some Haldol. They're having hallucinations. No, that's not a hallucination. That's okay. We're not going to give a medication for that. It's that's normal. Kind of one of the beautiful parts of dying.
Yeah. I mean, that probably would be the most comforting thing to see, if it's someone that you're happy to see.
Well, I look forward to seeing my dad if someday when I'm dying, whether he's there or not. The belief is there for sure. People are very convicted in that belief when they see them.
Yeah, and for me, I think one of the most touching things about working in hospice and working with patients at the end of life is seeing how the most important things in life are put in perspective at that point. And it's very interesting. People don't talk about, hey, I made this much money, hey, I did all this, businesses and whatnot. Those can yeah, they do count in some way, but usually it's about family. I don't know if you guys have
Mhm.
noticed, but like
Oh, yeah.
people, like people at the end of life are not worried. Like Penny, you said that really most of the time they're not worried about their own death. You know, they're not worried about even their eternal life, whether they'll spend it in heaven or in hell. I don't really usually find that, and it's very interesting as a chaplain to actually see these things, you know, practically at the end of life. That it's not such a bother. The thing that's a bother for a lot of people that are about to die is how my family carry on.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
usually
Yes.
the big thing. You know, they're more worried about the family than themselves. Or the other thing is, man, I wish I'd spent a little more time, you know, with my kids, or you know, with a little being a little better with my spouse, or something like that. Those kind of reflections, or people just reflecting on, man, I had a good time with my family, or man, I had a wonderful time. So it boils down to that family. So I think even when people at the end of life begin seeing these visions of family members, it's the things that were the most meaningful in their lives that are, you know, coming to the fore, you know, whether it's
Yes.
in vision or in terms of just mentally processing these things, and suddenly these are the things at the forefront. And for me, I think it's a huge blessing for me, because I'm like, I don't want to wait until I'm at my deathbed and then I start making the best, you know, of my time with my kids or like my wife. And so it's helped me really appreciate some of the little moments, you know, like having dinner, you know, with the family right there.
Mhm.
That's what
Hmm.
families, I mean, life is all about.
Yeah. I love talking to other hospice professionals and hearing like this. It's like we all have the same brain, you know, we've all had these. It's just so validating to have these conversations and these experiences, and that same, like people are not afraid of death when they get, like when they first get the hospice referral and they're told that they have 6 months or less. There's a little bit of fear there would be for anybody, even me, and I'm death positive, but really at the end it's always like, what's going to happen to my family? That's what
Hmm.
they worry about the most. Like, what are you afraid of? And it's usually never death. I'm not afraid of the death part. I'm afraid of the dying part. Like, what's the dying going to be like, and what's going to happen to my family? And
Yeah.
telling people, hey, by the way, we have grief support services. It brings the dying person so much relief to know that their family is going to continue to get some counseling after their death, and that we will continue to help their family.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Steve, you mentioned being in Kenya, but you were doing chaplaincy or pastoral work there.
Yeah.
Does Kenya have some sort of hospice equivalent? I
Very
don't want to
interesting.
make assumptions.
So hospice, as you know, the history of hospice is still pretty new, even here in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, um, and this is like one of those developed nations, and Europe also has a pretty much similar history, you know, with the development of hospice care. It's it's something that, you know, you're talking about the 70s, 80s, you know, it's being developed, and so Kenya is still a developing nation. So we do have hospices, but the system is not as developed as it is here in terms of who funds it, um,
Mm.
in terms of the level of offering care, like putting together the interdisciplinary team. You know, you've got like this
Mm.
whole team around you of a nurse, chaplain, social worker, like all these different elements that are necessary to take care of, you know, as you're
Hmm.
dealing with the whole issue of end of life. So um, it's funny enough that growing up in one of those towns in Kenya, there was a I used to volunteer a lot in during my holidays, after, you know, during high school. So I'd spend my holidays either volunteering at a hospital, and we used to have a hospice. So one time I went to the hospice and asked to volunteer. I didn't even know what a hospice is, but I thought it's sort of like a hospital. I think maybe some people from either the States or somewhere in Europe had been visiting there, and they did set up like that hospice. Um, at that time, we had a lot of HIV patients at that point, and we
Mm.
had a lot of people coming on board to try and assist. And I think majority of the care was on HIV patients, but after some time, there was also cancer patients. But yeah, they didn't have much opportunity for volunteer or anything like that. I never really worked with them, but it's kind of I've been reflecting on that a lot. That man, I kept wondering about this hospice and what they did, and I literally walked in there and asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" And maybe I was just getting ready, for what I do now. So it's not as developed, but some of us who've been here, and are seeing this, going back and trying to implement the same things or advocate for the same things. So it might take a while to get to this level, but not yet at the kind of level that we're having. And one of the other reasons also is there's still a very strong social community in most developing nations. So as much as there's a lack in um, funding and medical care and whatnot, there's still support, like with family. So
Yeah.
most people would still be at home and being cared for by the
Oh,
extended family, not just the nuclear family. That's a big thing that's available there, as opposed to here.
Mm-hmm.
But as times change, I think the kind of setting and setup that we have here in the States would probably be what will happen over there, and will still be useful. Yeah.
yeah. Because I mean, that's the way it was before in the States too. People would die in their home with their friends and family would all rally around. They die in their own home. Then we moved into hospitals and people started dying in hospitals. And now we're moving back into the home with hospice over the last 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
And so hopefully other countries like Kenya and other countries who are still doing that community-based kind of care and people aren't going to the hospital and dying, maybe they'll skip over the hospital part and they'll
Yeah.
just get their hospices and they
Hospice.
can, because going backwards like that has been really challenging. It's people they don't want to talk about death. It's so taboo because we did hide it in the hospital,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
for so long, and we learned how to prolong people's lives.
Mhm.
So then people just can't face the fact that we're going to die. They don't want to talk about it. And then we get people coming onto hospice, in their last couple days or weeks
Days.
of
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
surprised that they're dying when they're 95 years old because they thought they could live forever because that's what,
Yeah.
the hospitals said they could do.
Mhm.
So maybe you'll skip through the hard part. Just go.
Yeah. And I hope that skipping through the hard part will happen sooner than later, because what I have seen happening is the medical. We know the way the medical industry can be so profit driven sometimes,
Oh, yeah,
and
we
so
do.
like just uh, all these interventions that sometimes you clearly know are not going to add any value, just because people think, we just need to do as much as we can, keep making all these interventions, and they're costly. So we have situations where someone is having a terminal illness, and clearly no amount of medical intervention would reverse what they're having, but people are still pumping uh, money that is rare to come by, hard to come by, pumping money into trying to care for someone at the end of life. Not wanting it to look like they don't want to care for them. So I think there's
Mm-hmm.
a measure of education that needs to happen. So I've seen cases where someone has um, died, and in the process of dying, they have died and gone with all the family resources. Trying to you know
Um,
care for them in hospital, like houses and lands were sold, and friends gathered together and contributed money and whatnot. So a ton of money just goes to a cause that could not be helped. So I think this conversation is critical in those areas, because people don't have that money and they need to know, hey, we can sit down as families and um come to the point where if there's nothing more that can be done, we can accept it, and we can find support for this,
Mm-hmm.
and we can try to be there for each other and make the patient as comfort as possible, move them to comfort care, and save yourself even more trouble, so you don't financial chaos. You've lost a person, you're grieving, and you're dealing with financial chaos. You're about to go
mhm.
homeless or something like that, so yeah, I'm hoping it happens faster.
Yeah.
And
So then they are ending up in the hospital and dying in the hospital sometimes too then.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, the trend
Okay.
has begun being pretty much the same as what it was in the States, uh,
Oh,
but it's probably not lasted as long as it did last here. So yeah, I think there's need to reverse that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Well, it all comes down to people being told there's only one option when we know that there's not just one option,
Hmm.
and people being told, you know, that there's nothing more that they can do, but really we know there's more that we can do, to help people. But
And
that's part of the problem is they get told that like you can do this and you can do this, but they don't get the other side of that, which was, or you don't have to do this.
yeah,
There's another way.
yeah. And the question of doing something as an act of love, as an act of care, can be a bit of a problem.
Mm.
So spending money, treating this patient, even though it's not helping, just as an act of care, can be a bit of a problem. Just like sometimes in hospice, at the end of life, patients do not really want to eat, but
Right.
in some cultures, eating is the way you show care.
Right.
So we have to
Yes.
struggle with telling family that, hey, you don't have to insist on feeding your patients. But it's some families still insist on feeding a patient and end up sometimes killing the patient faster than
I've seen it. I've
they
had
said.
it. I had it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Had a
Yeah.
patient that we told him he's at risk for aspiration. Don't give him anything by mouth. But it was their culture to
yeah,
feed soup at the end of life, and they shoveled soup and he got an aspirate pneumonia and he died. That
yeah.
was their culture, and we educated to the best we could, and they did what they did. But when you are talking about finances, people don't want to put a price tag on the human life, and so they will
Mhm,
spend all their money because
mhm,
they don't.
Yeah.
It feels like, oh no, I'm not willing to spend the money. They're not worth it, and so people are going to spend the money, and
Well,
mhm,
I think to
it's
Steve's point, though, it's about education, right? Because they're not getting the information they should get to make that informed decision. They're
mhm,
not getting there's like to your point, there's other options. You can still be doing something, even if it's
mhm,
not treatment, curative care.
mhm,
well,
mhm,
yeah, I agree with that for sure, but we also know that we educate and educate and educate in the US, and people still will go back to no, do
Yeah.
everything.
Oh,
Although the
yeah.
money's not always coming out of their pocket. It's coming
mhm,
out of their, taxpayer dollars. So
mhm,
maybe that makes a difference. I don't know, but we educate a lot, and people still will choose to do those things as, you know, feed people IV fluids, tube feeding,
Yeah.
intubating, all those things that we know are counterintuitive to, a comfortable death. They're still going to do it even though we educate them.
mhm.
But it does help. I mean, I feel like we're moving in the right direction slowly. We do have a lot of people who are totally on board with stopping treatments and
Yeah.
interventions like that.
Yeah. But just for the record, back to the same question. I mean, other forms of chaplaincy are thriving in Africa, whether it's school chaplaincy, hospital chaplaincy, prisons, all that military. It's just this one area of hospice chaplaincy that I think there's still a big, we, we still have enough opportunity for growth. Yeah.
Do
Well,
you think you
Steve,
might go back and do that?
don't go back. Stay here.
Ali,
I mean do you see that someday in your future that you might
oh my
want to lead
goodness.
the charge?
Oh
Go
my
back
goodness.
to the homeland and
Ali, should we talk about this?
No, I don't want to think
mean,
about it.
I mean, it tugs on my heart a lot. It really does. But the universe has its own way of trying to put you in the right place, at the
Yeah.
right time. Sometimes where I think I might be needed is not really where I'm supposed to be. My own personal belief, I do have a belief in God, and I believe my life is guided and directed by God. So I do have a strong desire to go back home, to go to Kenya, to serve, to contribute. I mean, there's a lot I've learned by being here in the States, and I think I can contribute a lot. But to be honest, I think the doors have always pointed towards, even when I'm ready to just jump on the plane and go. Like, no, you're supposed to still have some work to do over here. So and really that's how my life has unfolded. I didn't force my future to come this way. I've told you my story about COVID. I'm just
Hmm.
yielding to God's leading. And what stronger evidence do you need than, hey, you're waiting to get into pastoral ministry and you graduate when churches worldwide close, and the only choice I have is to lean into hospital or healthcare industry, and I find a lot of joy and fulfillment doing what I do. So it gives me the sense that what I'm doing is meaningful. Being here in the States is a wonderful experience I'm having. I still think I do have some work to do here, but given the opportunity, I would love to still also be able to go back and make a contribution. And FYI, if that day comes, I'll be calling on you guys to come over and come for like a
Hey,
holiday,
man, I'd love to go over
in
there.
come in for some holiday or something in some place, and just offer your expertise as you enjoy yourselves. I'm actually putting together something like that, FYI. So I'll be calling on my team from
Yeah.
here at some point. Just go over there, chill out for a little bit, have fun, relax, because you need it. You do awesome work in hospice. I've been thinking about that. I'm like, these guys do awesome work. A vacation would be nice. Just go out somewhere, put up a place, you can go out somewhere. And the people on the other side can make use of this skill. So yeah, you can sit by a fireplace and there's people who've been bereaved or something, they can share their stories and you can share your expertise, comfort, affirmation, and you can head back feeling fulfilled and they can go home, feeling happy. So that's
I
one of
would
my
love
dreams.
to do that. That would be so, I always think about how I would love to go to other countries and see how end of life care is done. And,
Yeah.
you know, that just sounds so cool to me. Sit around the campfire and share
By
our
a lake, by a
expertise
lake.
and hear their story. That'd be so cool.
By a lake, yes.
By a lake. Okay,
Yeah.
by a lake.
Well, Steve, I feel like we could talk to you literally all day long, so I want to make sure we're honoring your time and putting a pin in it for now. That means we can call you back.
For sure.
Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want us to know? And also, are there places people can find you if they want to follow you?
I think we touched on a lot. I would say if anybody's thinking about, wondering, whether hospice may be their calling, either being like um, an hospice nurse, a hospice social worker, a hospice chaplain, you can start off maybe by volunteering in hospice, which very interestingly brings me to one of my most recent roles, where I'm doing like volunteer work as well as chaplaincy work. So that's a nice entry point where you can begin interacting with hospice, seeing what hospice is like. And I think hospice is wonderful because we try to work with the community around us, to let the people in the community who are at the end of life know that, hey, the community has not forgotten about you. So that's a place you can start. I think people can start. It's a wonderful place where people can start. And if you get the sense that, hey, I think I find a lot of meaning in this, then you can draw more and more into hospice work. So yeah, I would advocate for volunteers to call up your closest hospice and see if you can volunteer. For some work, volunteer your gifts, volunteer your time. Hopefully somebody calls my hospice here and volunteers. That would be a plus for me as well. Yeah, that's the one thing I think I would say. One of the latest things I've actually learned, in my time in hospice.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming and being on, and we wish you all the success in anything you do going forward.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, and place where people can find me. I do have a website. I don't do a lot of hospice work on my website. Maybe later I would. I still try to keep true to what I believe is also my calling as a pastor, as a minister. So even though I'm not like in churches, I try to be online. So Pastor Steve, that's prsteve.com. You can get me on there. I don't update it as often as I used to way back, but yeah, pretty much you can find me there. There's other ventures, but those are still in the works.
You can let us know. We'll update
Yeah.
things.
And we'll
Yeah,
make
well,
sure to link in the show notes.
yeah.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Thank
And thanks for having
you.
me here. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yes.
much. I have enjoyed myself. I hope you find my presence here beneficial. I'm really grateful for the chance to be here. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for what both of you do in hospice as nurses and social workers.
Well, if we've said this before, we've said it a million times. We could have talked to him for hours.
Freaking love Steve. I miss him so much.
I really seriously love it when I'm talking with other hospice professionals and they just take the words right out of my mouth and the experiences right out of my brain.
Multiple times, right?
I know, like over and over. So many
Both
of
of
the
us are just
things.
nodding our heads.
I know, like he said so much that just really resonated with me. And I loved the way that he explained, spiritual care. I loved it.
Yeah.
And I really hope that people who are listening will understand that the chaplain is not there for their own agenda. They're not going to try to preach to you. They're going to serve you and the way that you need to be served at the end of your life spiritually.
Yeah.
One of
And
the
if that means connecting to a local faith, or if you've been disconnected, or reaching out to your people or praying for you, they can do that, but it's not necessarily the sole purpose.
Right. One of the ways that I've heard people ask about spiritual care is just to say, how are your spirits holding up? And
Nice.
framing it like that. It's less like woo-woo religion type thing. It's just about your spirits. How do you feel? I think
Yeah.
everybody can admit, even if they have no faith at all and they don't believe in spirituality, they can admit that, they have some kind of spirit, maybe
Or
just
something that
at a
just
football
brings
game.
meaning. I mean, like he was
Yes.
saying,
Yeah. I
meaning.
love that. Yeah. That whatever is meaningful to you, what brings meaning to your life. Yeah. It
And
was
maybe
great.
it's a walk in the nature or next to a lake, as Steve would
Next
say.
to a lake. Yeah. Yeah. That was great.
Well, I'm glad we got a spiritual counselor on to explain their role, because that's so vitally important to the hospice experience, if people allow it.
So important.
And we look forward to more amazing guests.
Yes.
Until next time, remember to live.
Because someday we'll all be dead.